talk. Share.
That's some pretty fancy desktop pattern you got there. Is that just to help you find stuff?
Yeah, my organizational skills at work again.
I once did that on the I used to be able to make, with the Macintosh, you can make your own desktop pattern. I once did that, like took a screenshot of a bunch of files overlapping, and then I tiled it together. So it just looked like
chaos,
like
this. Yeah. Well, this is, normally this is organized, but the resolution changed, so it scrunched everything together. So, I don't, yeah, no, I am disorganized, but not quite that disorganized. Here's my grandson. I want to show you a picture of that. All right, so I think I'm recording this. Let me check. I don't know why we're recording it, but I think we're recording it. I don't know why anyone would want to watch this class later, but if you are here, thanks for coming. We are recording. I think we're sharing the desktop, and I think you should be able to hear me. So if you can't hear me, raise your hand if you're at home. Cool. If you can't hear me, raise your hand. Nobody raised their hand, so I guess they can't hear. Nobody can hear me. So what's wrong with that programming pseudocode, right? The thing about code is it's not about how well you can write code, it's how well you think, what is the code supposed to do? Most of your bugs are functional bugs. It's doing what I want it to do, but is what you want it to do what it's supposed to do, you know?
Well, it's funny, I mean, I had it on my system. It's been working for the past 2 weeks. I've modified it, it still works on my system.
Right.
I uploaded to GoDaddy and deployed everything.
Yeah.
I got the databases up, I got them running, I can't touch them.
Yeah, a lot of times it's, we can get to your situation. My guess is it's a database connection. 90% of the time when you're deploying, it's a difference in how they call their database. And I don't know, I haven't seen your application, but like in MyTunes, that database connection is over one file.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you just have to change that one file. I call it DB connection. You know, I don't know. But,
I specified it as a DB.
and the best thing to do, if you can't get it to work, is to do what we did, exactly what we learned in class, which is to do this. MySQL connection, or something like that. And you go here, and this will give you the code. This right here, I would try that right there.
That is not what they're asking for. Yeah.
So GoDaddy has a special protocol for connecting to a database?
Yeah, I have their script for that.
And are you able to make a connection? So have you tried this?
No. Hold on.
Yeah, now, you know, you have to fill in these 4 blanks, right? And GoDaddy has to set up for you. The first blank is, what is your database name?
Got that already.
And that could look very different than something like student.sanrosa.edu. For GoDaddy, it might even be a connection with like an HT, you know, a protocol.
I'll show you what they have. I have the documentation with my connection information in it.
Yeah, so if you can't connect to the database, then, you know, it's a GoDaddy issue. That's not a PHP issue.
That's null and void.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. What you could do is, and this is perfectly okay for your project, and you know, for whatever. The database that's on the student server is accessible relatively easily over TCP/IP.
Okay.
So with a connect string that just says student.sanrosa.edu here, and of course your name, your password, and your schema name, I think you'll be able to connect to a database that's on the student server. And you should have an account on there, and it's, you know, it's okay just to get your project running. I think that should work. Does that make sense? The PHP program and the database program are a client-server connection. They can run on the same computer, in which case you can refer to it as localhost, but they can run on, you know, over a network. And when we use Ajax, we're kind of running over a network, right? So, and when we're using MySQL Workbench, we're connecting to it over a network protocol. We're actually connecting over TCP/IP over the 3306 port in both of those cases, right? So even though your PHP program might be running on, you know, GoDaddy or another host, you could connect over a network to a database running on another computer if you're allowed to do that by that computer. You know what I mean? And the JC, I don't think there's anything to prevent you from doing that. So let's talk about what are we talking about today? So today we're going to go over the final exam. Although maybe we're bigger. Get through or something. All right. So the final exam for this class should be right over here. This was actually a pretty weird test, a little hard. So
We're supposed to eat pizza while we listen?
you could have food whenever you want, actually. Save me some. So, but I always think it's useful to kind of go question by question, so people. Does it tell you the answer when you answer the question? If you get it wrong or right?
No, you have to wait till they get that email from them.
Oh, but you do get an email.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just go over this just to, you know, whatever, comment on what you already know. So this first one, when you post a new blog, so where does the content get stored? So everyone kind of, almost everyone's got that right. In a WordPress or a content management site, almost all of the content is in a database. That's the whole point. And there are content management systems that you can use that are prepackaged. There's many of them, and there's a lot of them that are free, like WordPress, like Joomla, like Drupal, like Moodle, like Kate, for example, is a CMS, right? And there's also ones you can write your own CMS. And the MyTunes application is kind of like a CMS in many ways, or many of the applications that you've done in your projects are kind of like CMSs. They store the content in a database. So this, man, less than half. So which of these statements is true about $_post? Yeah.
That one kind of got me because I looked at it and I said, an associative array and a variable.
Yeah, that's the variable one. Right?
Yeah, well, it is a variable.
No, it's all of the above because I don't know if it's a multi-dimensional array and I've never heard that it was.
So what's the definition of a multi-dimensional array? Right? Is that a good question?
It's an array of arrays, but what?
It kind of is. It's an array with more than one dimension.
Right, because you can nest it within itself, but.
So $_post PHP. Let's just look it up. And is it truly a multi-dimensional array? First of all, is it a variable? First of all, is it an array? It is an array. It's an array. We know it's an array. What? Because it's got brackets after it, which means that it can contain more than one. Which means that because it has brackets, what goes inside the bracket? What goes inside the bracket? An index.
Deprecated.
Right? Well, that's deprecated. This is yeah. So what goes inside the bracket is an argument that will represent the name of the element that you're capturing the data from the form that was processed. Right? That's what post does. Right? So we know it's an array because there could be more than one data element coming from a processed form. Right? Do we know it's a variable? Yeah, so we didn't get to that yet, super global. But we know it's a super global variable. Yeah, we know it's a super global variable. Although we don't know what that is yet, we know it's a super global variable. But do we know it's a variable?
Yes.
If something is an array, it's going to be a variable, right? Because a variable is a construct in a computer programming language that holds a value. An array is a type of variable that can hold more than one value. It's a dimensioned array. In BASIC, they call it a dim for a dimension. If you learn Visual Basic, they don't have an array. They have, I learned it 20 years ago. Maybe they have arrays now. But at the time, they had something called a dim for dimension, which means a dimensioned array. Something that has dimensions. And they could be 2 dimensions, or they could be more than 2. Right? And if they're more than 2, it's a multi-dimensional array, which means it's sort of like a matrix. Not only can you give it 1 index, you can give it 2 indexes. And I think with post, it is, let's take a look. I might be wrong. It might not be multi-dimensional because I know it's a super global. Super global means that it's available on every PHP page.
Right.
Whether it has a value or not, you won't get an error if you try to refer to it.
And that's why I got confused, because I couldn't find anything that said that it's a multi-dimensional.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's hold off on that and see. Well, let's do this. $_post multi-dimensional array. Is there anybody on?
Basically have more than one variable, right? I mean, more than one.
Ah, right. So for some, where for some, they call this variable sum actually. Some input elements are an array unto themselves. They might, like selections, especially multi-selectors. And in that case, a post variable could be a multi-dimensional array. One named input element on a page could produce more than one value. Okay? So we probably, yeah. So sometimes you just got to throw the dice when you get 2. You got to go. I don't know what multi-dimensional is, but I'm in deep enough to say that we got 2. So. Well, you can also pass an array. Yeah. Well, that's what this is doing. So how do you pass an array in a value in a post? You have to have an input element that can accept more than one value. You know what I mean? Or you have to create one object from multiple inputs. You know what I mean?
I printed out the test, so I would go over and look at it. And on my test that I had printed out, I said all the above. But then when I went back to it, I was like,
yeah. Okay.
Why would you get 2 correct answers? And I don't know, I spaced it.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a.
I've been told that 2 other times today.
Okay, so I'm a little flexible on this one. I'm flexible on anything, needless to say. But let me. But I would say this. I would say this to be fair. This question came from the test last time I taught. It's one of those I carried over. I didn't carry over many. And last time I went into more of the multi-dimensional aspects of it, because we actually had a form with a multiple select given the application. This semester I didn't go into that, so we didn't even talk about multi-dimensional. But 2 of them were clearly right. But I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. But everyone got it right in one way. It is a variable. Right? Okay. All right. So this one, it's got to be better than 50-50, right? True, false. You must be working in a Dreamweaver site with a correct testing server setup in order to correctly use. So that is true. That you could test it, Yeah, and I said.
You can set up server behaviors without being in a Dreamweaver site connecting to a testing server, but you can't get it to function correctly.
I don't think you could set them up. I didn't predict that. Yeah, you have to have the PHP MySQL choice, or it doesn't know what kind of server behavior you want to set up. Right? So, and that has to be set up in the testing server. So, and that one, almost everyone got. This next one, wow, 100%. We don't even have to go over it. PHP. So sending email in PHP is pretty straightforward. This is as simple as looking it up, and I'm glad to see. I don't memorize this. So to me, this is a good sign that everyone is resourceful enough to look this up when they need to and do the right thing.
What I did with that PHP one.
The mail.
Man,
The mail.
that's one
Yeah.
of those ones.
Another one, I looked out and I got to the point of saying variable, and I thought I was done with it.
Which of the following is not a? So this is.
The only one that got it right.
So which of the following is not a? Yeah, you guys are in the 40%. I can right. Is not a MySQL. So number. Everyone got that, or almost everyone got that correct.
Okay.
So blob we went over. We actually used blob. You could argue is in lowercase, but officially it is a acronym. And in MySQL, it's always in uppercase, B-L-O-B, in uppercase, capitalized. But clearly, there is no number. There's an int, and there's a float, and there's a bunch of variations, large int, small floats, all of it. Okay, JavaScript has the ability to make asynchronous requests using a technique known by this term. So, yeah, almost everyone got this one. jQuery. What is jQuery? Anyone know what jQuery is?
Yeah, stripped out model of JavaScript.
A stripped down model of JavaScript.
Sorry, a redefined, easier to use programming language instead of or over the top of JavaScript.
It's a library that is widely used that provides a different way, a different syntax for doing a lot of the things that you could do in JavaScript. Yeah. I think that's an important question. You should be able to answer that. And there, you took the class. Yeah. So jQuery includes an Ajax. So here's the deal. Ajax is a technique. JavaScript doesn't have anything called Ajax natively. It has the DOM gives JavaScript a method called HTTP request header or something like that, right? You remember what it is? HTTP requests. HTTP request. I guess it's just called XML HTTP request. That's what it's called. So that is a method on the document object in JavaScript that you can use to make Ajax calls. There's nothing called Ajax in JavaScript. Does that make sense? It's just a technique. It's just somebody came up with that word, Ajax. Just a programmer called it that. In jQuery, they provide a simpler method for doing the same thing, and they call it Ajax, right? So, but jQuery is not Ajax. It just provides a method called Ajax that does almost the same thing. That doesn't do anything more that you can't do with XML HTTP request. It just provides some additional methods to make it easier to use. Right? Just to clarify. And we could close that if you want. Those guys were hoping that they'd mix and meet. They were going to have.
I actually use that glossary thing you have on the site.
To do this, wow, that's great. That's good.
I extra credit.
She's really going for there. She's cookies all day. Okay, so we did that. We did that. Pages of a WordPress site are comprised as files known as. Yeah. So templates was the correct answer. Although post is not necessarily an awful answer, pages of a WordPress site are composed of files. A post isn't a file. A post is a virtual page. A post,
You get points for that then.
yeah, it's a virtual point. Good for redemption at at the next JavaScript class. So, yeah, so what do I mean by that? A post, WordPress has both posts and pages. And when you make a post and a page, you're really submitting information into the database. But you're also creating a new URL, virtual URL, which you can use to access the content that was entered into the database. But that's not a file. And the true thing is, the correct answer is a template, which is the file that, which is the one or more, typically more than one file, that comprise the construction of the page. And in WordPress, by default, I think, you have a page, and page calls header, main content, sidebar, and footer. And depending on your theme, you could add and subtract from that. I'm sorry?
Nothing.
So, jQuery Mobile includes which of these events? So this is another one where you can just look it up. And you can look up touch all you want, it isn't in there. But you know, it just seems like so simple that I might have chosen touch. But it's a good idea to look these up sometimes, because that's what I did. There is a tap, but there is no touch. Let's go look. So, just like swipe. There's a swipe and a swipe left and a swipe right. So my page was still, my browser still had this as a visited page. So I went here when I was doing a final, right? And yeah, and I looked. There's a tap, but there's no touch. So if you want to build a new dots game, use tap, but there's no touch. Or swipe. Swipe is used a lot. I don't know if you guys have seen dots, but taking up half of my time in the last one. Okay, who's seen this? We'll take a commercial break here. This is one of the coolest things I've seen today. Have you seen this? Has anyone seen this page? So this is the London Underground map. So you've seen this. This is like this famous guy drew this as the map guide in the Underground. So this web page is composed of a bunch of lists. One big list, that basically draws all the stations, right? So it's structured. Here's the Piccadilly line, and here's the stations in the Piccadilly line, right? So all of the rendering is done with CSS. It's literally just a set of HTML lists. This is not being with CSS, border radiuses. Well, somewhere there's data that says where these things are, and but this guy spent, I don't know, there's an article about this today on TheVerge.com, but he spent like 150 hours just programming this in CSS, hand programming it, using rotations and border radius, and so yeah, check it out. This is going to be, if I ever teach a CSS class, the final project's going to look like this. You could do this. We won't spend as much time floating a sidebar as doing something like this. So, which leads to another thing. So check this out. I don't know if you guys have seen this. This is super cool. Okay, so all of these, so this is a whole bunch of rendering, it's a library of rendering capabilities, all of which are pretty much done, all of which could be done in CSS. It could also use SVG or Canvas, but this is actually, I just saw this today for the first time, there's some pretty cool things. Let's see. Where's the, there was one that I was playing before. It just randomly presents them. It's not that one. Yeah, I can't see the one I was playing before. Oh, this one is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Or, so, you know, browsers are pretty powerful. We you know, we think we're pretty cool by changing, you know, putting a gradient on a block and maybe putting some. Browsers have way more capability than we're taking advantage of as web designers right now. You know what I mean?
Go back to that other one that you just showed us.
Well, it's hard because they.
They were refreshes. There we go. Yeah, no.
Does it matter where you put the cursor?
No, yeah, you grab it. You can grab it.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. Yeah, there we go. Boing. Yeah, that's cool. But oh, this one is cool. Okay, check this out. So this is based on a hover, and it's basically like the fruit fly effect or the rabbit effect. Lots of reproduction. So every time you hover over one, it splits.
Well, see, that you can use in the Asteroids, the video game.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of these you could use in games. A lot of these are basic. They're kind of basic primitives for gaming type stuff. Trying to find this. There was one that was even cooler. Maybe it's this one. There's the shark thing. Oh, look at this. This is an actual application in the New York Times about our budget. Right? Where does our budget go? Social Security, Medicare, interest, and this is where it comes from. Oh no, I guess this is all spending. This is what was reduced this year. This is what was increased. Yeah. It was kind of cool. So we learned a little bit of this in our JavaScript class last year. Data visualization. Right? We did a map, actually. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, a Google chart. So what was that called? Fall 2012. Here. See, maybe it's not there anymore.
Yeah, your chart.
Oh, there it is. Okay, so here's a working example. Yeah, so you can this parses a speech or a debate and looks at word counts of different countries, and it goes across with 3 debates. And the third debate was the foreign policy one. So there's a lot more countries mentioned, and it renders. Took a little while to render that one, but. So it's a worldwide heat map based on mentions in the presidential debates. Similar type of library, but this uses Google visualization. This one uses this D3, which I think is even cooler. A lot more flexible, a lot faster. But there's one I wanted to show you that was really cool. Can't find it. We'll go back to it later. Okay, so back to the test. Where is the test? Tally results. This one, jQuery conference. So this was another like the most basic lookup one, right? If you go to the jQuery site right now, they're pushing their conference. So I figured it somewhere in the course of your research for the test, you would have gone across that site. If not, you'd have to go there anyway. But if you go here. Anyone know where it is? Portland. Yeah, so I think it's split. They took it off. Now it's in the UK. Well, I think.
No, it's a different date.
Yeah.
That's a different date.
I got to go back and regrade the test. Yeah, no, I know. Okay, so everyone got that except for the San Francisco one. So the San Francisco, yeah. So you get a card because there is. Here's a pretty good.
No, I put it up there, and what I did just a complete Google search.
So there's a fluid conference in San Francisco next week.
I did a Google search, and it came up with Portland, Oregon, Seattle, and San Francisco. Well, what I did is I did look at the date. San Francisco is 2012.
And usually you spend enough time.
I'm already dealing with my project that I put on the online and it's just totally closed. So it's like, okay, I'll get it done.
Okay, so that question was kind of throwaway, but another research question. Which of these jQuery methods does not alter the DOM?
Oh, I got that wrong.
That is good. Yeah. That is, a lot of people, most people got that, so that's a tough one, and that's a very pertinent question, and that's something I think we need to spend more time teaching in terms of web development. You know, even if you're a CSS, even if you don't consider yourself a programmer, you have to know what the document object model is. You have to know how to debug a web page from within the browser. You know, you didn't have to really know that. You used to be able to know what was on a web page just from looking at the code. And so what's changed?
Technology.
The real thing that changed is the real world, no one person develops an entire web page even. Every web page has got some kind of thing on it, a Facebook button or an iframe or a Twitter feed widget or something like that. And therefore, the CSS that you know that you wrote in a style sheet and uploaded to your server isn't always guaranteed. You know, you don't, as a web designer, you have to just realize you don't own everything. Every piece of code is a collaborative effort these days because no one web page doesn't include third-party widgets and other things. So knowing your code is not good enough anymore. You have to be able to actually go, when you look at your code and then look at your browser and say what's wrong, that's cause and effect, right? You should be able to change something and have an effect. What you have to be able to also do is look at the effect and cause. What is my page rendering and why is that happening? You know, maybe it's coming from something I didn't code. You know, maybe it's something different on the server, which you're experiencing. It worked on one machine, it doesn't work on the other. What's the difference? How do I debug that? All of this requires not just looking at your code, but looking at how the browser is interpreting your code. And as we've taught in this class, every browser now has something that allows you to do this, some kind of debugger. In Chrome, we have what they call the inspect element tool or whatever, but it lets you look at JavaScript. It lets I got to do something about my browser here. Okay, it lets you look at the document. It lets you look at the styles on each of the elements in the document. It shows the document in a hierarchical, fashion as it's rendered in the, in the actual code. The code doesn't always show you this, right? I mean, it does if you've written it well and indented well and closed every tag. But browsers will close your tags if you don't close them, and that might cause something different behavior than you expect. Right? So the point I'm making is, a lot of people stop with, I coded this page, why is it behaving this way? And of course that still applies. You're still writing the page, but you also have to have the technique of knowing what is the page rendering and why is it doing that, which is kind of a little bit of the opposite effect. And to do that, you've got to be really familiar with tools like this. And unfortunately, we don't teach a class. I teach a little bit of it every time in my classes, but I think this is something that belongs probably with CSS, because CSS people really need to know this. It's the only way you can really know what's going on your page.
Especially in terms of bootstrap CSS, and you're starting to figure out why is it
exactly, yeah.
And because there's something you have to override to bootstrap.
And some of that is dynamic. Like today there was a question about the carousel, right? So the carousel, when the page loads, is different than the carousel that you coded. It's got JavaScript, and it's actually moving things around. It's taking elements and creating them, and moving those elements and changing their attributes, changing their z-index. That's what creates a slideshow, right? So, but let's get back to this question. So the DOM is the memory element, the object in the memory of the browser that tells the page what to render and how to render it, right? And jQuery is a dialect of JavaScript. It's a tool, but it's a programming language that allows you to manipulate the DOM. A lot of what you do in using JavaScript is working with the DOM, either finding elements, changing elements, moving elements around, hiding elements. And almost all of these affects the DOM in some way. After adds content after an element. You could say P, you could say $P, the jQuery function, and you could say select the P. You could do dot after and give it some content, and it'll insert that content in the DOM after every paragraph. And what will that do? That will change what's rendered on your page. I don't know what you'll insert after. If you put after every paragraph or whatever, or just some kind of site or whatever, So that's what after does. Append does something similar. It takes what you pass it. So if you say whatever your selector is and you do append, it doesn't put it after the element. It puts it in the last place inside that element. And it'll put it in a div. And if there's other things in that div, it'll put it after those. Right? Add class. Does that modify the DOM? Yeah. Why is that? Because the DOM is not just composed of all the elements that are in the document, but all the attributes of those elements. And a class is an attribute of that element. In fact, a class is sort of a named set of other attributes. It's an attribute itself, but it also can change other attributes. Hide. Does that change the DOM? It doesn't change the DOM structure, but it takes one of the DOM things, or whatever you selected, and doesn't display them. Right? Right. That's the way it does it. Yeah. Display. Yeah. So that's what I meant to say. So it affects the attribute, but not the structure itself. The element is still in the structure. Right. So should you use that? What's the benefit of what happens when you use display none?
You hide elements, but the best way that I think to use that is when, if your page is too deep, hide some of the elements.
So like an accordion uses.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
So
website, hiding all the, I don't have multiple pages, all the content.
you're just showing what. Yeah.
Exactly. And you just hide divisions based on which, hide all the divisions except for one based on which tablet.
Right. Yeah. So there's there's pros and cons to some of these things. In how search engines work, and how they look at hide, hidden things, display non-elements. There are people that say it's better not to hide things, to move them off of the page, using an absolute positioning and some, negative 1,000 number or something like that. I think that's a little sleazier than hiding in terms of search engine. But there are articles that'll tell you to do that. I don't know why. Yeah.
You got to think that the search box will actually think about that, right? I mean, are they going to give?
They look for things like that are hidden, like that. They look for things that are like the color is the same as the background color. So a lot of people will put, Britney Spears 100 times in some div that doesn't show, even though it's there, but you can't read it. But Google's smart enough to figure that out. And nobody searches for Britney Spears anymore. So they'll put Lady Gaga or whatever. I don't know why I use Britney Spears. I guess when I started teaching this, she was popular.
Oh, I know.
I gotta change my chick.
You have to watch more TV. Come on.
It's one of those classic words, like classic.
I spend 20 hours a day looking at Jodi Arias, actually. I don't know what I'm going to do anymore. She's not going to be around. So, all right. She has her own television station about her trials and stuff. to add new functionality to a WordPress site, you would install which of these types of objects? 100%. Wow, that's pretty good. So it's plugin. So the key thing here is functionality, right? If you wanted to do something new, add a new feature, typically in WordPress, there's a plugin for that. And that's what I think probably for you, for people who build websites, the best advantage to using a CMS like WordPress is the library of free plugins that are available. You know, they give you features that you might or might not even be able to do on a custom site, given that, you know, they have user logins and all of that stuff. So plugins are really important. There are some features that, you know, you say, I'm going to do this in WordPress because there's a plugin that's going to make it a lot easier to do what I'm trying to do. And BuddyPress is a popular plugin. It sort of like builds a social network on a site. And a lot of like NGOs or nonprofits use BuddyPress, like for churches and things like that. You know, you could become a member really easily without really having, you know, a lot of infrastructure. It's all built into WordPress. It's very difficult to do. Think of trying, what we learned in this database class, and we got that little user login to work. Remember that 2 weeks ago? Try doing that for, you know, 150 or 300 or a 500 member church where people are coming and going all the time and all of that. BuddyPress makes that a lot easier. You know, they just become part of the WordPress users. Okay, and it's a plugin that basically, like I said, turns WordPress almost into a social network. By default, Ajax server requests and their corresponding response handling are another 100%. So asynchronous is part of Ajax. Asynchronous, JavaScript, and XML. And what we mean by asynchronous is that when you make a request, you don't hold and wait for the response, right? It's more like an email than a phone call, right? When you call your dentist to make an appointment, it's a synchronous conversation. You pick up the phone, are you free on Wednesday? I'm not. How about Thursday? Blah, blah, blah. If you use email, it's asynchronous. I want to make an appointment on Thursday. And you go to work and you get home that night and it says, we're closed on Thursdays. So that's you don't have to wait for the response. There's pros and cons to that. And it adds some complexity. If you think about it, things start coming to you that you might not, you know, when you don't expect them. So Ajax has something called a callback mechanism. I'm not waiting for the response, but what function do you want me to be there for when the response does come back? So Ajax is essentially an event, just like a lot of things in JavaScript. But it's an event that's not waiting for a click, it's an event that's waiting for the server to return a response to a specific request. And because they're asynchronous, you could have multiple requests on the page. They could all go out. Each request has its own response, you know, each response knows what request to go back to, and the request tells it what function to run. Where did we put our functions? Does anyone remember the jQuery function that we put our functions like in the MyTunes example? We use done. You could use ready, but ready is another. There's a variety of functions in jQuery for handling Ajax requests. And done seems to be the most current one. And the reason for this is Ajax is maturing as a protocol. The XML HTTP request is getting a little bit smarter in how it allows asynchronicity. There's new protocols coming out in ECMA 5, which are becoming more available in JavaScript in the browsers now, that have protocols like a promise, which is very similar to an event handler, but a little bit more sophisticated. And it's probably beyond this class. But the point in this class is Ajax requests by default are asynchronous. which means that the program does expect a response, and it knows what to do when there is a response, but it doesn't wait for the response. It continues to do what it's going to do, whatever that program does. It doesn't interrupt the basic flow of the program from statement to statement. You do an Ajax request, the program keeps processing the statements, then when the request comes back with a response, it then runs that function. Which of these is not a keyword in SQL? Almost everyone got this. Index is actually a keyword. It's not, I don't think we used it in this class, but it's used in a variety of ways. You could create an index when you create your table. Indexes are created by default when you create a primary key in a table. You might not see it, but if you do that in MySQL Workbench, you create a table with a primary key, and you look at the code that's created, the SQL statements, it'll create an index on the primary key. You can also independently create indexes. We didn't go over that in class, but even if your data isn't a primary key, you can index a column in a database table. And what an index is a subset of the table that can be used by the query processor of the database, and usually for performance reasons. Sometimes it can help speed performance, sometimes it can't. And a database administrator is trained into how to use indexes effectively for performance reasons. So let me give you an example. If you have a table with a primary key, as I said, by default you're going to get an index of it. So what that means is an index is sort of like a subtable, but it only contains one column, the column that's indexed. And it has an internal pointer to the column of the full table. So the query processor can do the query just on the index. If you say, give me the email, give me the account for the email of Jay, and you know the guy's email, it looks up in the index for Jay, and it doesn't have to go through the whole table. It's a lot faster. And once it finds that record, there's an internal pointer to the full table, and it just has to get that row. And it makes your database request a lot faster, right? As I said, primary keys by default create an index, and that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes you want to index another column in the table, like zip code would be a good one, or area code, right? You might have a lot of queries that say, give me all the accounts that are 707 for whatever reason. And some tables might benefit by an index of that. The downside of indexes are on the other side of the database workflow. When you're inserting and updating records, if there's an index, you have two things to update, right? So it slows down performance of transactions, that typically speeds up performance of queries if they're used right. And that's just a long-winded, sometimes I put these questions in there. What is an index? You can look it up. But it gives me a chance to kind of explain that, even though we didn't really talk about it in the class. Question?
What would be a good example where this would be used at? If I was using, trying to get an index on that. What would I use that for?
So in a database, you typically create an index as a database administrator. Yeah. And as a user, you wouldn't really use it. The database uses it automatically. Yeah. Does that make sense? So you might, as a programmer, you wouldn't typically use it. So first of all, let me say this. Managing an SQL database is, part of it is a programmer's job to create the tables and all of that. But once those tables are created and the application is running, there's typically a database administrator who keeps everything running on the database. And performance tuning is a big part of his job. And if he sees that it takes more than a half a second to insert a new, whatever it is, a new tune into iTunes, then he's got to do something to make that table perform better. You could break up tables to make them smaller. That's not always a good idea. So there's different techniques. Indexes are something that the database administrator would do. And the guy who wrote the application, he might suggest it, but typically there's something that's more performance-oriented than application feature-oriented.
Yes, it's more higher volume of data that you have. You want to go quicker instead of having to go to the files directly and pulling it all up at once.
Exactly. So here's an example. Like I said, area code. If you're the PG&E database and you're managing, you know, whatever it is, 1 billion phone numbers on 1,000 area codes, but all of your billing is based on area code, you might want to have an index on the area code column of some tables just so you can get all of those at one time. It makes it easier to find those that have that area code. You might not want it every time you, on the table that holds the transactions, every time somebody makes a phone call, you have to add not only a record, but an index record, and that might be too expensive. Think of all the calls that are made. You know what I mean? So, but indexes are what I would call a kind of invisible part of the database to the developer. But they are a keyword in MySQL. Which programming technique is useful in selecting data from a relational database and bringing? So this was a tough one. Less than half got it. But this is exactly the technique that we spent a week going over early on in the MyTunes example. Right? Does that make sense? And what I think the best way to illustrate that is to go to GitHub and just look.
MyTunes example.
The MyTunes, yeah. So here, if we look at this, this basic core part of the program, which is get music, right? The page loads, and as Steve says, everything is loaded onto the page. You just hide a lot of it, right? How do you loop through? Remember, we're talking about a hierarchical structure, right? Hierarchical structure, which means that you have genres, which can have artists, which may have one or more albums, which may have one or more tracks, right? So it's a nested loop structure in your program that would be a very simple structure to loop through those tables, right? Because, why is that? Excuse me. First, you're going to get the first record in genres. And that might have one or more artists, so you're going to loop through those. And each artist might have one or more tracks, so you're going to loop through those. And each album, I mean, each artist could have one or more albums, and then tracks. So there's 4 layers. So what we're going to do is loop through each of those 4 for every node of genre. And for every, and it's a nested set of if and for loops is perfect for that. Are there any records at this node? And if so, return the data that is in those records. And you do that repeatedly through those 4 steps, and you'll get all your data. Right? So here, are there genres? Select all from genres. For each genre, go through this loop. Right? But you're still going to have to loop around to get the next genre after you've gotten all the information for all of the artists in that first genre. And the same thing propagates down. So while I didn't come out, I think I did come out and say this in a lecture, that this is how we're doing this. And we spent, I know, at least a week kind of building this thing, right? So, yeah. Well, but just a week just on this one part of it. Yeah. So, but it is, you know, I could see, well, let's see what the other answers are. So the other answers are at least mixed. There wasn't one clear answer. Is this recursion? Recursion is a similar but slightly different thing. Recursion is where a function can call itself. And they might teach you this in the CS10 class. Maybe not. Or maybe in the Java programming class. But recursion is where you have a function, and a function can call itself. Yeah, somehow you got to organize that, or you're going to get an infinite loop, obviously. Right? So somewhere in a for loop, you're going to say, do this. And what's a good example of recursion? Can you think about it?
factorials when
Yeah.
calculating factorials.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you stop when you get to
A prime, right? Or
prime numbers.
no, I guess it's 1. Yeah.
Well, you just give it a number and it adds all those numbers up to that point multiplied together. So
Right.
if you say factorial of 5 is
5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1.
So
So what you
the
do
point is when you say you call it on itself.
when length is 0.
N is zero, is
The length is
0. Then stop. You're done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So add yourself to all of your subsequent integers until your length is 1. Yeah. All right. So it's not recursion. Inner joins. Inner joins are a form of SQL query, right? Where you're putting information from 2 tables together. Does that make sense? So in an SQL database, there are relationships between tables, typically, right? A table represents an entity, and the reason we typically use relational databases is because they allow us to relate entities to each other in some kind of structured, semantical way. So an employee can have something that says he's a member of a department, and that department could exist in the department table, and they could have the same identifier, so they can relate to one another, right? Now, when you build the tables, you define a foreign key relationship to make sure that there's integrity, to make sure that you can't have an employee in a department where there's no department in the department table, right? When you're requesting information from the database by submitting a select query, we use an inner join to put those tables together. SQL isn't smart enough to use the foreign key references by itself. It doesn't use those at all. So does that make sense? It knows about them because you've written them in the code, and it uses them for ensuring the data integrity. How does it do that? It does that in 2 ways. You can insert an employee to a non-existent department if you've set it up as a foreign key. And what's the other way it ensures the integrity? You can't delete a department that has employees because they would not have a home. And that's the last thing you want. A CEO finds you with employees somewhere, there's no department, you're in trouble. So, so that integrity is used by most companies, naturally. Now, but the point is when you're writing, when you sit down and you're a programmer and somebody says, oh, the boss wants a payroll report, and he wants it grouped by department, listing every employee and what they make, even though the database has those foreign key relationships, you as the programmer have to make an inner join to relate the employee table and the department table. And you do that by relating the department number. There's a department number column in the employee table, and there's one with the same exact values in the department table. But you have to physically do that in the query, and that's called an inner join. Nested functions. What is a nested function? Is there such a thing as a nested function?
It's like an anonymous function inside of the
It's sort of a function that calls a function. It's not a function that calls a function, a function that defines a function. So a nested function is a function that's defined within another function.
Like the one we use to make that fetch from the database is kind of...
Right, we do that quite a bit in our jQuery or in our JavaScript for the MyTeams application. Within one function, we might have another function defined, right?
Like the done function.
The done function is a good example. That's not really being defined, though. The done function is part of jQuery. We're just calling it, right?
But then we define sort of the...
We define the anonymous function. Yeah, you're right.
There's an anonymous
Yeah.
function.
So in JavaScript, a lot of callbacks are kind of nested functions. They're a function defined within another function. And we do that all the time. There's a done function which we didn't write, which jQuery is going to know to execute as an event when data gets returned from a server, right? But within there, we define another anonymous function that actually does the work that's within there. And within an anonymous function, we could define a function and actually call it, but it can't be called from outside of that function because limited by the scope of the function in which it's called. So a nested function is a function that's defined within another function, and by its nature, its scope is only available. It can only be called within that function.
It's helpful though. It's called the value function.
There's a lot of so there's a big move towards functional programming, and functional programming is similar, although a little different in how it's constructed. A lot of the reason people are moving to, especially on the web, to functional programming is it's a way of breaking up programming into pieces, because a lot of what we do in programming is a part of something. You know, long division is really a series of steps. You know, you divide, you subtract, you add down, and then you do it all over again, and you do that a bunch of times. So for very long division problems, computers can be broken up into those steps, and they don't have to wait for each other. And they can parallelize and do their work independently. So in the context of JavaScript, the important point is you can have a function defined within another function, and its scope would only be available there, but it's not going to parallelize. You know, whatever data is returned from that function will be available to its outer, what's called a higher level function, but it doesn't do things that pure functional programming does that allow you to break up functions sort of functionally. And I think we're getting too deep into them. So what do I mean by that? A subfunction, a nested function, can return data to its parent, but it can't, it's not smart enough to say, go out, the parent is not smart enough to say, run 5 of these functions and return them back. And there are languages that allow you to do that. JavaScript is not that quite evolved. There are dialects of JavaScript that are coming out that provide a pretty good functional overlay language. LiveScript is an example of that. I could show you that because I was just taking a look at that. I think it's at this site. All right. Where's LiveScript? .NET. Excuse me. So LiveScript is not a dialect of JavaScript. It's a different language that can be compiled into JavaScript. You write LiveScript, you run it through a process, and it produces JavaScript. But the point is, its syntax is such that it implements this concept of functional programming, where functions can return data back to other functions. Yeah, so browsers can't run LiveScript. They can only run JavaScript at this point. But you could compile this into JavaScript, or there's a LiveScript library that you could include in your pages, and that'll allow you to run LiveScript. So include it inside the JavaScript, it'll be able to run in the browser? Yeah, there are ways. And if you go to this page, so you can't do it without JavaScript. You can't do it without JavaScript. Okay. Right. And but the point is, the difference is in functional programming is that you're designing things very differently. You're looking at how can I break up the pieces of a process, and the reason you do this is for more scalable problems. Like a billing system, on a telephone carrier, right? So you're doing a bunch of things. What are all the calls? Add them up, apply the tech, all these processes, and you're doing it for 500,000 customers a night. So, and you're trying to do that with open web technologies. So what people are doing is writing in a functional manner so that you could spawn a process that says, figure out this bill, but that is actually a bunch of sub-processes that can run on different computers and can scale across computers and return data back to one main function that's doing all the coordination. So, like I said, beyond the concept of this class, but sort of a coming trend in web programming as the scalability needs go up. You know what I mean? So you can learn some cool things in this class, but to make a company or a product out of them, you gotta scale. There's not a lot of you look at most successful .com companies now. It's not a lot of innovation. It's a lot of hard work to get to scaling. Instagram is not a lot of innovation above Flickr. They just got a lot more customers and they were able to deal with them, right? They, just because they made it really simple to put filters on images, right? But that's not magic. You could do that in Photoshop or whatever. Same thing with Facebook. There's no magic there. It's PHP that is a bunch of database tables for tracking your friends, right? But they were able to scale it up to what is it? 5 billion people now, or whatever. So I mean that and you could have friends all over the planet. You don't have to wait for it. So it's really they spend more time on engineering and building the servers and rewriting the software to be able to deal with the scaling than they do on the new features to add a friend. That stuff is pretty straightforward and easy. So back to the test. So back to this one. So like I said, this is the right answer. All of these answers are good and real topics, and some of them might apply in some way to the question. But in the example, we really went through the nested loop with the queries inside of them. Which of these jQuery methods is similar to a JavaScript while? So this is good. Almost everyone got this one. Each is something we use quite a bit in the MyTunes example. It's basically a loop. You could pass it a set of objects and say, do this to each. And each takes a function, and it runs that function on each of the elements. Okay, a page in the jQuery mobile consists of an element. So this is really a lookup. I got this right off of the jQuery mobile page. It explains exactly how their page model works. You could, it's as simple as just going to jQuery mobile. And if you look at, I think it's in there. Where is it? Introduction. I think it's right in here. Pages and dialogues. And it's right, the answer to that question came right from there.
Yeah, data roles on the first line.
Oh. Yeah, I'm sorry. The dialogue one is pretty cool. I don't think we used that when I was here. All right, where are we? Which of these is the first major step in developing a database-driven website? So this is good. I know I said this, and I know and I know I said this after we did the whole MyTunes thing. But even in the process of building MyTunes, this is the process that we followed, and it should make some sense at this point that you can't really build a system to deal with information until you kind of have an idea of what that information is and sort of a somewhat good way of organizing it into tables. Because if you reorganize those tables after you've started building your application, whatever you built is kind of useless, you know what I mean? Because applications are pretty written, at least the way we wrote them, wiring them up to the database, they're pretty specific. There's other ways you could do that. There's middleware, there's sophisticated middleware you could buy that maps, your JavaScript entities to your database tables. And enterprises do, places like Wells Fargo Bank have hundreds of applications and very large databases, and they invest in software to kind of help with a lot of the wiring that we did in our little four database table application. So, but even then, you want to make sure your database is pretty well modeled before you build all the middleware stubs to get all those clients to know what they're talking about. So it's good to see everyone got that, or just about everyone got that. what type of column in a relational theory refers to a unique row in another table? So this was, this is one of these where you could click primary key pretty quick because we learned about that. And it is close. It is a primary key in one table typically. It doesn't always have to be, but generally it is. But a foreign key is different than a primary key. A primary key means it's unique within this table, and a foreign key means it must be a value in another table. True or false? 100%. WordPress uses its own language and all that. Yep, so that was kind of a giveaway. Although there are people that, come to this class with that question. So at least you can answer that question. That's good. Yeah, the point is, all of these technologies, if they don't sit on things you already know, beware. Good, like Bootstrap, for example. It doesn't do away with divs. It doesn't do away with CSS. It uses those to make, to add a little bit of value, right? It's the same thing with WordPress. It's not designed to replace everything you know about building a website. It's really designed to make it easier. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But everything you already know is already there, right? And the more you know about PHP, because WordPress relies a lot on PHP, the further you can expand and customize WordPress also. Which of these programming languages does not support user-written functions? So, does C++ supports you? So what is a user-written function? Function, you're right. Right. So what is a function? Function is a block of code that will execute when called upon as a block of code, right? And some programming languages come with functions that are built in at some level of the language, right? Some functions are built in really primitively, like add is a function, but it's implemented not necessarily in a function. In most languages, it's in what's called an operator, just a plus operator. Right? It's not really a function. But examples of JavaScript functions would be get element by ID. That's a JavaScript. It's not really native to the JavaScript language. It's part of the DOM in the browser, but it's a function that's built into the DOM, and you don't have to write it. You know what it does, and you know what to expect when it returns and all that. But most languages allow you to write also your own functions. You can name them and put code in a block and run those functions. CSS doesn't really have user-defined functions. CSS now has some function capability, but they're built-in functions. You can't write a CSS function, which would be pretty nice if you think about it. If this is the case, make this class do that. Or you could predefine a whole bunch of classes that are, you know what I mean? But unfortunately, it doesn't do that. JavaScript is sort of a functional programming language for CSS, exactly, or jQuery. So the average for this class, for this test was 85, I think, a little bit over, somewhere around 85, which is pretty good, especially when there are a couple of wacky questions, I'll admit, although a couple of giveaways also. So, and hopefully, it reflected something that you might have learned this semester. Hopefully, you might even have learned something more just by taking the test. I'm going to go over the HTML5 test, if you don't mind, because there might be some people listening. There's a few people that are in both classes that are here, but I think we ought to close this.
I mean, oh my God, butter and sugar and everything else. You guys have to have one of my chocolate chip cookies. I'm waiting over it.
Yeah, if we were really as serious, we would have eaten your cookies first and then gone to the pizza because we never had them.
Sorry about that. Those network guys know how to party.
You still up, so I don't have to bring it home. I mean, I had 5 of them already.
That's all the calories you eat for the day.
Fresh out of it, it was to die for. That's
Not about it, daily.
So how many?
it was more than what I needed.
So how many people here would have passed the HTML5? Is anybody in the room in the HTML5 class?
No.
Nobody. And I think there's one. I think there's one person at home. Let me check.
Can you email me this page so I can refresh it my memory next semester?
That test page? This page?
Pretty good.
Is that what you?
Where'd you go? No, it'll be fine if you want to go over it.
Now, on to HTML, I literally took it right over across and so like I got a lot of like communication over what we're saying was different. I knew it was supposed to be headed over the block tag.
Well, there's a lot of differences. The question is, what is HTML5? It's some of an update of HTML,
Yeah.
as you say, but there's a lot more new technologies.
Including a lot of stuff you would take for your JavaScript.
Exactly. So there's a lot of stuff. So this class really focuses on all of that.
Yeah, and that's what I was doing a lot for my HTML, but I was like also thinking like a lot of it, because I used a lot of HTML2 code, I was like wrapping my like HTML2.
Right.
And I was including my jQuery and my JavaScript inside that. Everything was running fine. The browser, I was like, well, there's something I should use in my
Yeah. So everything in HTML previous to HTML5 is still available.
Okay.
There are some. Well, I should say it. There are some things that are deprecated, but for the most part, everything is still supported, and more functions are supported.
Because I've heard everything HTML2, and then when HTML5 came out, oh no, nothing's going to work, and then
Yeah. It's not a whole new thing. It's just an upgrade. Yeah. And it's an upgrade to the doc type. It's all simpler in how you define the doc type.
that's what they were telling me. So it's like, okay.
Yeah. So let me see if I could. Where is our class? Here we go. Okay, so there's a few people from our HTML5 class. So I'm going to go over the test now. Any questions while I'm opening?
This is the HTML5 one.
Yeah, I didn't hear any of the ringing, so we can hear you. I did not even notice that all the above was there. There. I just got this one on. It's first. It's the zip. I know. Got issues. Yep, I got your zip, Nick. Thank you for that. I thought nested loops was right, but I saw different. That building. Recursion could be something. We didn't go over recursion, and it could be something that could be helpful. And that's sometimes the danger of Googling things. But we did go over that nested query loop. So I'm not sure that answered you. Yes, I'm an HTML. Is there a replacement class for XML as far as certificates? I'm not sure I could answer that question. And I'm not sure what certificates the XML class is required for. But that is a good question. Yeah, they haven't taught it. I was the last one to teach it in 2011. It was supposed to be taught in 2012, but it got canceled. Oh, it's for the PHP, which kind of makes sense. That's a good question. I'm not sure who to ask that, but I will try to find that out.
And then how would you let us know the answer?
Well, I could let Joe know because I have his email. But is anyone else? I don't know if anyone else is interested. XML, I won't get into it. What we learned in JSON, it pretty much is a more current way of doing data transitioning, transportation than XML. Still perfectly okay to use XML, but a lot of times when we're using JavaScript, JSON is just easier because it's already structured in a JavaScript type of data format. So there's nothing wrong with XML. It's just not used as much because better technology has come along. So I am going to go through this, even though you haven't taken this class. Which HTML technologies allow a web server to initiate communication with a browser? So Ajax is incorrect, right? Because that allows a browser to initiate communication with a web server. WebSockets is one way of doing the opposite. It's one way of letting a server ping a client, ping a browser. Right? It's a protocol written in JavaScript that's a part of the HTML5 new features that isn't, we'd have to look to see its availability in browsers. Might not be available in all browsers now, but it's becoming a popular way of doing server-based communication back to the browser.
Is that like super new?
It's kind of like polling. It is pretty new. Yeah.
Why would you want to use web? I mean, a brief example of using a WebSocket would be when you need your server to communicate with the browser, producing what kind of information?
You know, go to sfgiants.com, right? And there's an app on there that update. You don't have to refresh the page, and the page isn't making Ajax calls, but the server is refreshing the page for you every 20 seconds, which is about every pitch in baseball. But that's baseball. But you see what I'm saying? That's what, you know, why would you not do that in Ajax? Well, there's nothing to request. You request the same thing every time. You know what I mean? So this way, just let the server give you the refresh, you know? How many balls, strikes, outs, what's the count, whatever. So WebSocket. So for you guys in this class that aren't taking this class, it's even better to go over this because you're going to learn a bunch of cool stuff that's available. You might not learn how to do it, but you could go to the HTML5 class website and see it. Because all this comes from that. So which HTML5 technologies affect the browser's same origin policy by tightening or loosening it? And that is this thing called CORS, or CORS in CSP. There are two ways. So what does that mean? Same origin policy is followed by most browsers. And that means that when you do an Ajax request, you can only request that service from something on the same domain. You can't say an Ajax request to New York Times / whatever, you know. Cross-domain Ajax calls are prevented by the browser for security reasons. But CORS and this thing called CSP are different protocols for enabling Ajax to make cross-domain calls.
Are they protocols?
They're protocols that you insert into the header of each HTTP request.
Okay.
The first thing is the server gives you something to insert, and then you use that to insert, and that's what ensures the security.
Right.
So if it's a security protocol wrapped in HTTP that transcends the built-in cross-domain protocol protection the browsers provide. So, yeah, it's things you traditionally would have done in PHP. Right? Yeah. So PHP will allow you to make a cross-domain, but a browser won't. So a lot of people do this today with server-side code. With CORS now you can do it with client-side code. Very good call. Okay, a single web page application can present multiple addressable pages using which HTML5 technology? So what do we mean by what is a single web page application? Single page web application.
Like an example? Or
yeah, like, well, either way, what's an example of one, or what is? Well, that's an example of one. That's a single document, multiple page example. Yeah. Excuse me. Our website is one. You know, there's only one index.html for /web programming on my website. And yet there's multiple lessons, and it looks like there's a page for each lesson. But they're really just different Ajax calls to a database. It's just swapping out. So the history API in JavaScript and HTML5 allows you to take a single page app like that and define virtual URLs to each of the states, you know, for, let's say, each of the lessons, and also enable your back and forward browser buttons to navigate through those. So I didn't put it in my lesson website this semester, but next semester I will. I've already built it in. I just haven't updated it. Yeah, I'll be able to send out. Go to our website /11, and you'll get to week 11, things like that. And the browser button will work. Here, look at this. You can tell it doesn't work on our class website. Where is it? It's right here, right? So here we're in week you know, we're in the finals week, right? And the URL doesn't change, you know. If I had implemented the API, the history API, each one of these would be an addressable URL.
So if you were to, like, you know, you want to email one of these pages to somebody, you select the URL and copy paste it, they just see the regular page, they wouldn't see the exact.
It would take them exactly to where that URL would take them.
Yeah.
It's a way of creating a physical address to a virtual page.
Yeah. So you're using less space when you create a virtual page.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So so that's the history API. And also, the browsers know enough to be able to implement it in their back and forward, you know, buttons. Which, as you can see, if I go back, it doesn't take me to the last lesson. It takes me back to the previous page. Right. Right. So
History API would allow you to go back to the last lesson.
In the history API, that last lesson would have been an addressable page. Excuse me. And when I hit the back button, it would have taken me there, because it would have. The history API not only makes these virtual pages addressable, but it tells the browser that they're an actual page. It makes the browser think they're an actual page.
So does the history API, does it define the pages that when you load the home page, will it define which one of those pages it is? Or how do you give it the history?
Yeah, I don't know. I think in JavaScript you give it, that's a good question. Yeah, you know, we're, yeah, we might be getting too deep because that is like a whole lesson in the class. In the HTML5 class, yes. Yeah, so it's a lot more than we did with Korean or Linda. And I've talked about it. And there's pros and cons to that because we don't have JavaScript as a prerequisite, and we do kind of get deep into JavaScript. So yeah, so there's pros and cons. But when I looked at the HTML5 as a topic, I thought it made sense to cover the full breadth of technologies. And they're all here. Whether, if I teach this again, I might rethink that, because for a lot of students, it wasn't really what they were expecting. They were expecting, you know, the class to really be about new tags and, you know, CSS gradients and things like that, which we did cover, but really in the first 3 or 4 weeks. So, and any feedback from you people who took the class would be appreciated. Although you're the ones that stuck around. So where am I? So that's the history API. Geolocation. So some of you probably learned this already because it's one of the more popular parts of HTML5. But it's a very simple JavaScript API that allows you to get 2 pieces of information. Right? You can't get driving directions. Right? It doesn't know roads. Right? You can get. Can you get the distance between you and somewhere? You can't do that, right? Because yeah. But it could give you 2 things, which is 1, where are you? And 2, have you moved since the last time you made a geolocation call? Which is a very useful call in itself. You know, so those 2 things are available in geolocation. The first one is probably a much more popular one. And that is, where are you? And it'll return what? Latitude or longitude, which is pretty useful. You know, if you read books from the 1870s, like Around the World in 80 Days, people spent a lot of time in the cutting edge technology. Was that? Where are you? You took a sextant, and you know, if there was a clear day at exactly noon. First of all, it was very difficult to tell at exactly noon because Rolexes weren't as good in those days. But the first thing is, what time is it? And given that, where's the North Star? And where am I? It could be inferred from that. Right? Now it's as simple as you know, turning on your cell phone and making a geolocation call. Most cell phones have that capability built in some cases. In JavaScript, it's really simple call, and you know, it's just basically a one-liner geolocation, and it's built into, I think, every browser now. It does require the user to opt in. Does that make sense? Yeah. So how does it work? So geolocation is something the server, you know, the page tells it to do. Somewhere in JavaScript it says, you know, make this geolocation call, and the browser will say, ask the user, are you okay with sharing your data?
Yeah.
because the website now is going to know where you are, right? Which, you know, obviously is personal.
So that would be that, like most apps you use on your phone and stuff, they almost always have a thing pops up to locate you.
Yeah, they have an alert. So most geolocation capabilities in smartphones have a built-in alert.
Yeah.
Regardless of what application is making the request, they set up that alert. So do browsers. So do I have an application that does geolocation? Yeah, so I think it's in that fall 2012. And I think as Paul said, it was this one. Yeah, so I think this is the one. So this is Mary's Pizza Shack, and if I go our locations, this doesn't have geolocation. It just knows where the locations are. It does. So it knows how far I am. Yeah, this does have it, but it didn't ask me. Yeah, I might have it as one of my preferences. Let's try it in Firefox, just for grins. Or even let's just try it in a new, you know, Chrome has anonymous browser windows now, which are totally cool. Incognito. So this is a totally another session, and again, it didn't ask me. So let's try it in Firefox. Is Firefox opening a window? Or there it is. Well, Firefox is slow. I haven't used it in a while. It's slow. And it crashed. All right, is it going to...
But it is open source.
It is open source.
So I can actually get a pretty decent browser on my old power.
So it did not ask me. So yeah, I don't know why it's not saying it. Maybe it's in my operating system preferences to allow geolocation. Seems kind of dangerous. Anyway, back to the test. Geolocation. Which of the following HTML5 client-side storage APIs has been deprecated? So, in HTML5 now, using JavaScript primarily, you can store data in your browser persistently, right? There's database capabilities built into your browser. And for a while, there was even SQL-based database capabilities built into the browser, or at least specified to be built into the browser, but unfortunately that's been deprecated. So that is the correct answer for those of you in the class. But the takeaway is there are still 3 different protocols for storing local data in your browser for a specific site.
I always wondered why they actually deprecate that SQL.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know, because you would think people would use it. And it worked pretty well, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, SQLite is owned by SAP, I think, now. It used to be owned by Sybase. Maybe that's part of it. It's always about licensing. Enabling offline access to your web page involves adding which attribute to your HTML tag? So this is related. In order to have offline access to a database, it's got to come with the data, right? So you have to have it stored somewhere. And the correct answer is, everyone got it in this case, manifest is where you define, it's the, I think, attribute in your HTML tag that lets you define sort of the payload data applicable to this site should it be offline, right? So that's another thing I might add to my class website, right? It's pretty easy to add. I already have the lessons organized. I'm going to add the history API so you can actually navigate with virtual URLs from lesson to lesson. But I'm also going to make it that if you've already accessed that lesson, store it in your browser. So if you are on I don't know where you can't get network these days, JC is probably the best place where you can't get a network. But if you're at a place where you can't get a network, you can still look at the lesson. Even though your browser can't get to the network, it's stored in the local memory of your browser. It's stored as an object. That's really all it is. So.
Now there's a degree though that it can be stored in there, right?
Yeah. So, and I'm not sure, especially with file access.
Yeah, because you have to have a server sometimes to access a lot of stuff on the site, right?
Yeah, and you don't want you don't want a server to have unlimited access to your data. That's one of the big. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, that was a kind of a controversy when file storage API came out. There was a problem or a perceived problem where people said it's a security risk because they can just fill up your disk really quickly. I'm not sure if that's the case. I'm not sure how much validity there was in that. And obviously there have to be ways to limit that because allowing somebody access to your file drive, even if they can't read, just writing can destroy your drive.
Don't they have an option though that you can either have manifest on your hard drive or not?
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. Yep. Yeah, but you don't know what you're getting. You might say yes, but you don't know what you're getting. Yeah. Ajax functionality is provided by which standard DOM object? So we already went over that in the other class. The JavaScript object is called XML HTTP request. Ajax is a function in jQuery that basically runs XML HTTP requests. Content security policy is implemented on a site through the use of HTTP headers. So remember, it's one way, CSP is one way of getting cross-domain data from the client, and the way it's implemented is in a information in the payload of an HTTP header. Which recently proposed event type presents a uniform interface for both mouse and touch? So pointer events are sort of a new DOM event set that are sort of a step closer to moving to removing the difference between mobile and desktop apps, which is an important thing to do. Right? As developers, we shouldn't say do this if you swipe and do that if you go, they're the same thing. So the DOM model is moving quickly to adapt to mobile technologies. The way to do this now is with jQuery Mobile, right? It builds on the DOM to enable swipe, but it should be built into the DOM. What are the different parts of WebRTC? WebRTC is actually one of the cooler technologies. Real-time communication. You can build chat systems very easily in a web browser now. Browser-to-browser chat sessions, right, are as easy as a simple JavaScript code. What?
I said we took this last 3 semesters ago. It's not.
Yeah, we expanded. Yeah, you're right. We expanded the class quite a bit.
I feel like I
So you took the yeah. So I talked to Linda quite a bit today, and about how to evolve the curriculum and how this is not just for this class. How to evolve the whole web curriculum around the certificates, because we need there are classes we need that we're not giving now, and this class was one that we talked about quite a bit. And my opinion is the first half of this class, maybe the first third of it, as I taught it, and I can show you the outline, should really maybe evolve back into the CSS class, a lot of it, and some of it should be in a new sort of mobile web apps class, which is really what this is a lot about.
So I was getting a certificate. I applied for it, or I was set on to get it like 2 years ago, and they switched every single class on me, so I haven't been able to finish the last 2 years.
That's the problem with changing the curriculum, Yeah. So what you need to know in the marketplace changes a lot, but you can only change it so much because people are invested in in an educational plan, and you can't change it too much. They're just changing one thing, like cutting out the XML class affects people, as you can see. So it has to evolve to some degree, and we have to be smarter about how we design the classes. it shouldn't be about a specific thing, but more like a set of skills. You know what I mean? But anyway, this was the class that we taught this semester. And for those who took it, it was challenging because there was a lot.
Yeah.
But there was a lot to learn. Which technology is being demonstrated in the following JavaScript statement? Navigator, geolocate, so it's pretty straightforward. So here's the part of the test where if you're just surveying the test, you can learn a lot. Because this is the implementation of a lot of things we talked about. Excuse me. So, obviously geolocation and get current position is its main method. And that will return typically a object that contains a latitude and a longitude, which can be used by mapping software or your application. In the Mary's Pizza, it's as simple as I have the latitude and the longitude for their three of their locations, and then a mathematical function that we literally got. Remember when we built this last year, we found a distance calculator based on 2 latitudes and longitude sets, and we just plugged that in to get, it's not a real distance, it's as the crow flies, but it's pretty close, Okay, which technology is being demonstrated in the following job? So this is the history API, right? Per state. So this was your question before. How does the history API work? So this call is part of it. It's saying,
It's basically like a pseudo class almost that you're putting into the header, right?
I'm not sure about that. Per state there's a history object, and we're saying that this URL, virtual URL, will represent what happens when you click on that tab or something. Which technology is being demonstrated in the following JavaScript statement? So all these stay the same. Create writer. So that is using the file API. In the file API, the browser is given the ability through programming of JavaScript, to open or create a new file locally and update it with information. To create a writer, you're literally going to write to the file. You're going to add content, whatever that is, right? So where would you use something like this? This might be useful if you're, think about this. You have a client that has a contact form. And you could put, every time somebody submits that contact form, sends an email to the client, but you could also store that record in the database. Somebody filled out the form on this date, this was their name. But clients don't know how to access databases. You have to build a whole page to get to them. Another way you could do it is write it to a file in XSL format, XLS format, Microsoft Excel format, right? Which is a published format in XML, So you could create the file, and then your client could just open up that file in Excel, which they know how to use. So for things like, maybe a contact form isn't a good one, but a form where you're filling out an event, the RSP for an event, and the event coordinator just wants an Excel file with all the people that filled out the form, you can just write it to an Excel file right from the browser.
I was trying to do that for a client a couple months ago when I was working on a website for them, and basically what they wanted to do, though, they wanted kind of old school, they wanted a PDF. And I noticed through PDF editors you can actually do the same thing. You have to download the file and open it up in Acrobat, and you can send it from there without having to use the web browser. That's
true. Do you know there's also a PHP writer, a PDF writer in PHP? PHP has functions that allow you to, from the server, turn a document into a PDF. Yeah. Yeah, and then send it to a browser. So,
what is Wiki?
I think if you just do that.
Wikimedia, and you'll have an example of it.
Right.
Add to book.
But here, you could add all of these objects to a PDF and basically write a PDF. And so all of because PDF is a open protocol. It's patented by Adobe, but it's an open protocol. All right, where is the we're running out of tabs here. So we talked about the file API. Which technology is being demonstrated here? Event source page, event listener. This is an example of something like WebSockets, very analogous, but a different way of doing server to client-based communication. And it's called server-sent events. So here you're not just sending, in WebSockets you're actually opening up a network connection to the browser and you could send any kind of request. Here the server is sending specific events to the browser. Right? Which technology is being demonstrated in this? So this is, well, there's Ajax, basic Ajax. This is Ajax without, this is what an Ajax request looks like without jQuery. All right?
So what does this have to do with HTML5?
Good question.
Okay.
Yeah. HTML5 is a good place to teach Ajax to people who haven't taken the JavaScript class. Okay. So we have one chapter on client-server communications, and we talked about Ajax as client-to-server and WebSockets and server-side events as server-to-client. But that's a good question. There's nothing in HTML5 that improved really much upon Ajax. It was available before HTML5. All right. Which technology is being access control allow origin? So this is what's called cores. This is you'd have to go and look at the file and where this is set up on your server. But this is a way to allow cross-domain data sharing from the client. It's still implemented in the HTTP headers, but it's coded slightly different way. It's a little easier to code. Here we are looking at get user media is going to be WebRTC. Okay. Yeah, so WebRTC allows client browser-to-browser communication through JavaScript, right? And it does it in a multimedia way. You could set up chat sessions, but you could also set up audio or video communication sessions.
So the live feed communications that they have now, are they based on a WebRTC?
Most of them are still proprietary. Right? So Skype wrote a lot of its own code to do what it's doing. Now any JavaScript developer can write Skype for their specific site. Right? So you don't need a third party. If you want to build a site for a client that allows even audio chat, you could do that now in JavaScript.
Would you need a pretty big server size to do something like that?
Yeah, obviously, yes, yeah. You have,
As far as Skype has to stay, there's probably reason why they're so,
yeah, they know how to scale. Yeah, so what do I mean by that? If you set up Mary's Pizza Shack with a chat session, yeah, they're going to need more bandwidth if people are going to start using it to submit pizza orders.
Yeah.
The good news is maybe they'll get more pizza orders. Or get them faster, get them more efficiently, whatever. Might not be perfect for pizza orders. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, to do that, that's a server-side event. You know? That is, yeah. You know, that is a cool workflow. When you make the request, you allow the server-side event access to you, so you get the ping when the pizza's ready. I like it.
They have that Domino's. In my Domino's website, you create pizza on there, it does the same similar thing.
Wow. Yeah.
They have a little loading bar.
Well, yeah, but that's usually have to get logged off on their site.
Yeah, get people log onto their website.
Very people are just going to start doing a lot of.
Yeah, I could just push it out, right?
Oh, yeah.
So let's see. We talked about this.
The Precision Media Hub. What is that? Float?
Yeah, this is all part of WebGL, Web Graphic Language. So probably beyond the scope of. Yeah, definitely beyond the. I mean, we could go back to the class site, but I'd have to start.
Is WebGL, that's a technology that's older than Canvas. So is Canvas trying to take over WebGL?
I don't think they're related. I think, here, let me.
It's a graphics language, correct?
What?
I don't know, but I know that people sit around going.
Yeah, so let's, here,
I paid all this stuff is new.
for any 3D graphics or 2D graphics within any
Right, because when I was answering the question for SVG, WebGL was what was replacing that.
Right.
So
I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think that they have somewhat different backgrounds.
right,
So I think replace is a strong word.
okay,
SVG I think still has a place. Canvas still has a place. WebGL kind of brings it to another level though, in terms of 3D, number one, and really more for gaming type of graphics, and less for things like. So where is SVG very strong? In vector graphics.
yes.
Vector graphics. Right?
Global vector graphics.
And Canvas is strong because it'll accept any type of graphic element, both bitmap and vector. Although it's not probably as evolved as a language as well as SVG. Whereas WebGL is really designed for, doing, virtual worlds, like first-person shooter games and things like that.
Takes a lot more horsepower to run it.
Takes a lot more, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's all passed to the graphics processor on the video card.
Yeah, so a lot of these things are really written in a third-level language like C, and brought through a WebGL rendering engine to be displayed on the browser. Because JavaScript probably isn't robust enough yet to deal with the, the manipulation of WebGL.
So it uses the HTML5 canvas element as just accessing the DOM interface.
Right, it renders through Canvas.
So you use those parallel. Okay.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say they're replacing. I think each has its, and SVG kind of has a resurgence now, I think, a little bit.
It does because it's actually come out with a new version. I guess the technology or maybe the language has changed a little bit.
All right. So we are at what technology being demonstrated here? So this is web workers, right? And web workers it's a new JavaScript API that's part of HTML5, and it allows you to, my understanding of it, it allows you to parallelize processing of complex JavaScript applications. So you could, instead of having a single-threaded application, you can have a multi-threaded application, even with multiple sessions collating back to the server. So what does it mean, multi-threading? It's when you take a process and break it up in some way and parallelize its processing. And what web workers do is it allows you to do exactly that. It's almost like spawning, I believe, separate JavaScript engines to run in parallel.
And that's web workers.
That's web workers. Yeah, it's really for more scalable applications, I think. One example would be, large data transfers. Uploading a image. So a website that allows you to upload your electronic patient record. Which today is sort of cutting edge, but 2 or 3 years from now, it's going to be a reality. And when you move from Kaiser to Sutter or whatever, you're going to have to upload a file. This is my patient record. There might be a chip embedded in you somewhere. It might be stored by the IRS. But my guess is it might be a file. And you're going to have to upload it if it's like 15 megabytes or something. Or for things like Google Drive. If you think about what these technologies are, they might not be from Mary's Pizza Shack directly, They might be enabling things like Google Drive. How do you get your, or Google Video for the cloud, which might not exist yet, but will be coming. How do you do cloud-based services that scale? Well, you have to scale up. You have to get more throughput to the server. And Web Workers allows you to better leverage your network and browser capabilities by breaking up the work and doing it in parallel. And here we're looking at constraint validation API. So with this statement here, what we're doing is saying, select all the inputs in the document and make their custom validity statement try again. That means if the data that's entered into the input element is not what you expect, make that the message for validity exception.
So you can set this as a customized error statement instead of writing out an error statement?
The constraint validation API is a brand new technology in HTML5 that we'll have to look and see what browsers support it, that standardized some of the validation work, some of which is being built in HTML as well, not just JavaScript, right? Like,
so the 10 lines of code that I have in there says no, and you go again, I can just put this.
You might be able to streamline it using this. Yeah. So we went through all of this in the class, and it's a lot to go over. No, I don't know if anybody went through and did an exercise for every lesson. There's a lot to learn. But all of this is pretty well documented on this site.
How long is that site open for?
And I'm hoping it will be open for... Well, you aren't in this. You aren't in this class.
No, he's in our programming class.
Yeah. So.
Very cool.
I mean, don't you have all of that in a zip file that you can just like
Well, okay. So
put somewhere?
the best. Well, that's a good question. So where could you learn about this stuff? So the best resource, which Linda probably used for her class as well, is dive into HTML5. It's a totally free book that's available online. You can also download the PDF for free. You can also buy it. It is available for purchase as a paperback. But I think it's an amazing book. And almost all of this class came from this book or resources that sort of spun off of this book.
As you were going through the test, it looked a lot like Programming for the World Wide Web is a book, and it covers a lot of what you were talking about.
Oh yeah, there's another great book that I use that I'd like to use for this class. It's an O'Reilly. Let me see if I can find it. Might be in my shopping list. It's mobile web application. Gotta be in there. And a lot of the things in our book, in our class, hey, it's not even in there. Let's see, it's HTML. There we go. I think this is it. This is actually a pretty good book. It goes through some of the things we talked about. You can look at and it has great code examples and great real applications. Yeah. And they all have these scary monsters on there. If you, I don't know what that is, but you can order it at Pages' Grill. But there's some, a lot of the things we talked about: the web sockets, web storage, geolocation, web workers, device orientation. That's pretty straightforward, right? Yeah. Portrait of a landscape. But there's an API for that as well. So, and some advanced JavaScript capabilities like Angular, and this book is a little different. But I think some of these projects down here, I might not make the book a requirement, but I might introduce them if I teach that class again. Because there's some cool projects which we didn't focus on enough, I think, in the HTML5 class. But anyway, that's the final. See if there's any questions. home. I was trying to implement. Can you post that link? So yeah, I will give you that link. Where here we go. So, and this is an example we did in the JavaScript class. There you go. So, any questions about the final, about the project? Anybody want to show off their project? People are what?
Give me extra credit, I will.
I'll go there. What's your, where is it? Here, let me get
Well, I
it.
did two, well, things that I was doing, I make a website for a client. So I was mostly putting all my time and effort for that. And then basically I was like, well, I need to go through the product setting too.
Yeah, I saw this today. This
Yeah,
cool.
some of the stuff's still not up all the way.
So this is,
server issues.
these are images that,
Yeah, there are images in those. I have a bunch of server issues with them, so I'll have to go back and get resubmitted tonight before I finish up. But
so these are, is that an Ajax code?
yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, you could tell about them.
And I also made a bunch of JavaScript. I made everything expandable and scalable, so like for every image.
Right.
Yeah. For every gallery, you can click on it.
Oh, that's cool.
And see what else? I also made on the last page I did a bunch of link forms and things like that.
That one went off to the side.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
It was kind of, yeah, when I made the code, they both kind of based on the similar JavaScript code, so I wasn't sure how to block one, so one could just stay in that form, the other one could be scalable without having the whole
It pop out, yeah. I don't know. I'd have to look at what it's doing. Cool. Anybody else? You want to show off your music? Oh, we can't get to it right now?
No. I check out mine. We looked at yours. Oh, is it already? Yeah, I think. Oh, no, not yours. Final. Yeah. I didn't catch it. I submitted to all the gallery. Oh, no, that's just for galleries.com/tech. All the galleries are going through and validating their data.
Galleries?
Yeah.
So this is with jQuery Mobile? No.
No.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, cool. And this is XML feed or JSON to get the points?
No. It's a Google map. Google Maps.
Right.
Yeah.
But how do you position the points?
They do it. I cut and pasted the code from a project last year, so it's just part of their map markers, part of the reference.
Right. So you have to give them the positions.
Yeah. And so what I do is what I did was all of the laps and longitudes, I put into the database.
Oh, wow.
If you do the address, it's not always accurate.
Yeah.
And I don't want to call it every single time.
That's cool. So you're storing them in the database.
I'm storing the database.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I read.
You click on any of the markers, and you get some basic data. That's
Right.
and you can call and determine something. So if you go, go look on the laptop. Yeah. So yeah, and you can go over that.
Cool.
And if you go back to the gallery, so click on any of the galleries. Those are all stored in your last tab.
Very cool. Tabs within accordion panels.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Very cool.
Yeah.
And
then the art block tab is based upon a brochure that goes out. But then I use a PHP function to calculate the second Saturdays. And then I have a little add the calendar link that basically
yeah, that's cool.
And then what happens with the calendar is that it gets back to the link, it automatically reads the page.
And it shows it's an exponential line, whatever. That was looking good so far.
So one of the basic things in HTML5 that we didn't talk about in the final, but we talked about probably in the midterm, is micro-formatting. And micro-formatting should be taught in HTML, I think. It is it's a way of marking metadata that can be structured, right? And there's many different types of structures, of metadata structures. So, well, it changed the site a little bit, but it used to have the structures right up front. Here. So here are some of the specifications. So an H card is a specification for a person. You know, somebody who could be identified as a entity. You know, contact is really what it is. And it has a specific structure. It has a, you know, markup with specific attributes, typically implemented as class attributes, that tell other applications what the specific sub-data elements are in the data structure, right? So a vCard would have name, telephone number, address, all of that stuff. Address itself is a micro-format structure. Doesn't always apply to a vCard. Address could be for a business or something like that, or for an event. So, and the reason I bring it up, Steve, is that there is an event microdata. So putting it in an ICS is good because it gets it portable to somebody who has an ICS-based calendar. They could just put it right in their calendar. But you should also micro-format it so the search engines know that it's an event. And when you micro-format it, some client applications are smart enough they don't need the ICS. They can just pull an event into a calendar directly from the micro-format. And that solves two birds with one stone, you know. And micro-formatting is amazingly powerful for search engine optimization. You could have things micro-formatted like reviews, right? Using the hreview format. So, and that is who did the review, what was the review, 1 of 5 stars, all of that stuff. You can micro-format recipes. Here, in fact, here's the whole list. So, here we go. So, recipes. So, if you think about it, if you look up on a search engine, if you look up strawberry shortcake, let's see. I don't get any recipes. Let's, do you see them? Yeah, but it's not showing you, you know, what I want to do is find the recipe. Let's see. What would be a good recipe? Lasagna recipe. Sometimes Google is smart enough to take micro-formatted information and put it right in the search engine results, right? Like they are here with these reviews. They're able to go to this website. Because the reviews are micro-formatted, they could not only read that they are reviews, they could actually collate the data on them and summarize them, right? Which is pretty cool. Yeah. So here. So yeah, this recipe is marked up because it does present some metadata, but doesn't present the recipe. So let's go in here, and here's the recipe, right? And let's look at the content. So it's waiting for an ad all that time. So where is my, here it is. So you can see they're using some of the format, like ingredients is an item property, which means as opposed to a class, it's another way, it's another attribute we can use to define what is the property or what is the data element we're capturing here, right? So that's the ingredient name, ingredient amount, blah, blah, blah. So basically you're taking structured data, marking it up with special HTML so that machines can read it better than humans can read it. Yeah, see that? Yeah.
It looks like it actually.
So it looks like there's actual ingredient numbers, you know. Diced carrots might be, you know, 1282 or whatever.
Go back to the Google search that you did. It's just interesting that the ingredients here, the data grams, are 3.92, and here it has the total calories. It doesn't have the grams or anything.
Right.
Okay, so the calories might be different.
It might have been marked up in the head of that document or something. We didn't look at it in detail. But these are, but Google calls it, I'll get to it in a second, Steve. But Google calls these rich snippets. It's kind of their brand for micro formatting. And they will, and you can see they use them pretty heavily. But it's nice to have that. If you're competing with somebody else and it says how many calories, how many hours, well, it could be a showstopper. 3 hours, I'm not cooking it. But you know what I mean. It's adding more information, which is good. And so what was your question, sir?
Oh, I just noticed that
Talking too much.
when they did all their list of ingredients, there's a bunch of list elements, and they all have the same, there's obviously built out by JavaScript or whatever, but they all have the same ID. And I was wondering if that, you know, just from a fundamental web.
Yeah, so I don't think that that was, let's take a look.
So like LI, yeah, ID.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. So this is not a good page.
Right. So they need to add an index.
Yeah. They have this index here,
Right.
but that's just bad code. That's broken code.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
Now, the other semester, we were talking a lot about this, and what my teacher said was that sometimes what people do is make the churches here up more at the top. They'll put a ton of microdata inside of it so that it'll pop up more. But instead, what recently happened, like over the past year or two, Google started noticing a lot of people doing that and started like actually counting back on people who put too much microdata inside their website. You know, so that they, you know, like for instance, stuff that's not related to the material they'll put in the website to get people to go to it. You know, like pop-up websites do that a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's true. So microdata became so powerful that it became abused, like a lot of things, especially with reviews. And Google was partly the fault of that because they used reviews and user sentiment as a pretty big indicator in their search engine algorithms. So, but the point is everyone started getting reviews illegally, you know, paying for reviews or asking their clients for reviews, which isn't really acceptable. You know what I mean? Under terms and conditions of Google, at least, you know, you have to put a review, and you can't give somebody a discount. You know, I'll give you $2 off your pizza if you go home and review us. You can't do that. It just doesn't, you know, it's like stuffing the ballot box. So
I still know a lot of people who do that.
People do that. Today, I don't live in Petaluma, but I, you know, picked up a pizza here, obviously, so I looked at a Google Pizza Petaluma, and I saw a review from a friend of mine who I've had pizza with before. I go, if he ate there, it's going to be good. So, other than that, to be honest, it's not bad. But, yeah, so user sentiment is important, and people were stuffing, and they were stuffing other types of microdata as well.
Yeah.
Like events, because those will get, you know, even though they might not have been critical to the business, if you put them up there and Google indexes them, people find them. And especially around events, it's not just Google. There might be other organizations. Like the newspapers are always looking for events. And they might have alerts on specific websites, you know, like Wells Fargo Center or whatever, that look at what's coming up right on their website. You know, interweb data, you know, site-to-site data collection is popular with microformatting as well. So, but it's just a slice of HTML that's relatively new in HTML5. There were earlier versions of it, but with microformatting it's become a little bit more standardized. It is something when you build a website you should think about. And I bring it up with Steve's because you had events in there, and you have the ICS, but microformatting would have brought it to even another level in terms of that.
One thing I would say though is make sure to microformat at the end of your design process is respect, because I was building a client website like a couple years ago, when I first came into web design. And first thing I was like, oh, microformat, do that first, you know, like make sure everything's all right there. And then as I was building the site, like uploading and like, you know, upgrading the site, you know, over periods of time, like things always like, appear around the top of the header, and the site wasn't finished yet, so everyone was going to it.
Right.
It kind of like loses bad reps for the site, kind of, people go to a site and it's not working, they're just going to leave it,
Timing is everything. Yeah, when you do a site, yeah, and how you roll it out, and making sure the search engines don't crawl it until you're ready for them to crawl it.
Exactly.
So there should be a search engine optimization class. We're talking about it. There is a there is a plan in place to put an outline together for one. So I think we're still like at least a semester from actually rolling out the class, but I think we're getting close, at least to being able to offer it. And I think that would help the program a lot, because I think it is a part of web design. It's not a sleazy marketing activity, although it can be. But the more education there is about it, the more it becomes part of web design. Because it needs to be part of web design. It's not an after thing. As you say, it's very important for the web designers not to get crawled too early. You want, it's like showing off your house while it's in construction. Not a good thing. You want to have the open house. So, other sites that people want to show off, or anything else? Any?
You can try mine if you want.
It's on the student server? No?
Yeah, it's on the student server. It's not as pretty as those guys.
So your what's your?
IAB.
IAB.
I typed my name wrong or something, yeah.
I was going to ask you.
Stop with it.
Type my name. They don't check spelling. You don't have to be a real person to get a student account. Which one?
The first one.
Ah, this one. Yep, I saw this last week.
It'll take a few seconds to load.
This is pretty cool. So this doesn't use Google Maps.
No, and I really wanted to
Which is cool.
do it without Google Maps, but I haven't got very much data in there, because putting in the data is a real pain in the butt. I don't have a good way to do that, other than regular IBM in the database, although you can do this part of this. How did you do that? I used open layers, and then they had
Maybe not.
I do have that working on my 31.
It takes a, yeah.
So the maps are okay, but I really would like to do
So the
types of map background maps, and this I'm not having very much luck with the open layers maps. This is like the only one that seems to work. They have a lot of different ones with XU and people trying to use, but I haven't had much luck with this.
So this is the cool part about this. If you don't see it, I think is this part, where one call can produce a page that renders multiple maps, each with a different trail.
Yeah, and each of these trail segments is it's all in the database. Except the background map is not in the database, that's being fetched. But the red line is
it's the opposite of what you're anything like that.
Which is a XML format for GPS data. And these, this particular one, this is the Annabelle one. And I got that
Is this open map?
from the Garmin site. Remember, they had all these people and somebody had posted one that had all 25 miles worth of trails up in Annabelle. And the nice thing was they were already broken into pieces. So, maybe I found some software to do that. It's been a long time. But anyway, I had those already separated out. But these other ones with Verdell and the Point Reyes, those were runs that I did with my buddy, and those are collected off of his Garmin watch. And I just I couldn't figure out how to, I really want to split those up into particular trail segments so you could actually like look at a piece of the coast trail between between two other.
So you could drill down. Like drill down, yeah.
Drilled in.
That would be cool.
And then it would be probably best to have like an overview map, so maybe there'd be an overview map.
That might have been an A project.
All show you, I guess, all the segments, and you could say how long is that segment, maybe it would show a trail profile.
I was gonna say, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So obviously web mapping applications are very hot. In terms of being able to, so they go from as simple as every business site needs somewhat of a map, you know, whether you're a dentist office or a pizza place or whatever, you know, where are you, how do you get there, how do you get directions? With an hour of coding, you could do something as simple as I did with Mary's Pizza Shack, which just gets more clients engaged, you know. How far is it, you know, where am I going, and where's the closest one? Where is it within the mall is a big thing, especially in urban areas. It's, you know, an address is meaningless in Manhattan. You enter a building and there might be 5 Starbucks in the building, you know? You know what I mean? You know, just the lobbies of these buildings are block long. So just apps that help you navigate even within buildings. So maps are incredibly hot. A lot of mobile applications are about location. You know, Foursquare and Yelp and all of those. Yelp is essentially a map with reviews, you know? Mapping is sort of a key technology that is easy to learn with the web. You don't need, you know, a GIS background and have to have programming at that level. You don't need to build your own map. You just need to know how to use an already existing map like Google Maps or Open Maps or whatever, and a little bit of JavaScript programming. And some of it is things you might not even know. Like distance is a hard thing. You know, you have to know geometry. And I didn't do that well with geometry. If I did, I wouldn't be a web designer, right? But I'd be an architect or something. But the key is, you don't have to write that function. You just have to know enough about what it should do and how to implement it. You know, because it's pretty easy to Google something that says, how do you find the distance between 2 points given latitudes? And there's code out there that you can at least see how it's working and modify from there. So mapping is really hot with mobile. And we saw a lot of great map. There was another student, see if I could find her in the HTML5 class. You know you have way too many tabs. Oh, I'm sorry.
One bad thing about this one was in terms of being a mobile app, it doesn't work well because there's some kind of, like I guess it's a bug, but the background map is made out of tiles. Okay. And those tiles, you have to force in the CSS that tile to be rendered at 100%. So you can't let it, otherwise it would be treated as something shrinkable.
Right.
Then you get the map all chopped.
You can't put these in tab panels or accordion panels to get messed up. It's pretty typical. I think Google Maps is also similar to that. Well, you've got it to work in tabs within panels pretty well.
Yeah, no, that worked.
Are they capable of string?
I don't remember whether I think I just used percentages for it. It works pretty well with the same you want to 90% or something like that. And it's the dynamic. You can use both static and too from Google, but
This one you Google?
This one's a Google chart. It's not a map though.
Oh, that was the one I just showed us. True. Yeah.
What's really neat, I was going to suggest another feature for yours is that you have like, what's around where you are. So you say, limited coffee shops or galleries or whatever like that. And then, 2 or 3 little clicks. So, and then you can use Google Places. Yeah, Google Places is an overlay of Google Maps that allows you to do content-based searches. Yeah. Give me all the Starbucks in this proximity or all the coffee places. Or all yeah. And then it just gives you a list by, and you can start by distance or something like that. Final project. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think with open layers, you can bring in
Bootstrap rocks. So where is her final?
I was just trying to stay away completely because it's
Yeah, I think this is like a travel blog on a map. I think that's what, but I don't think this is the, I think there's a more finished version of it. Yeah, I'm not sure where her final project is. You know, we could get to it from here.
Restaurants or whatever, and it gives you a list of all those sorted by distance from where you are now. But then it gives you directly the places. So it can be, there's some pretty powerful tools.
Yeah.
There we go.
I recognize being
Well, you know, it doesn't hurt to explore. You know, I'll open it up and it doesn't hurt that. It's always cool to know what else is out there. It frees you up. Because there's also limits on your time.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is like a map-based blog, which is kind of cool. So different places where Irina was, and images. Get rid of this. Images of when she was there in the pop-up. Yeah, this is really nice. So, but again, this is just a web page being driven by Google Maps with overlays. So, you know, the point is, thanks primarily to Google, but other technologies, maps as a web platform are kind of possible. You know, I mean, there's tons of things you could do, and it's just really easy to program these things, for the most part. But here we have a website that tells a story with really no textual content. You know? It's just kind of cool. So, and I thought of a lot of applications like this. I work in a nature preserve, and we do hiking all the time, and there's millions of pictures of a lot of people coming through, taking pictures of all these different animals and things. And why can't they just submit them to one map so we could know what's where, you know, I mean, it's a dynamic place, the animals don't stay in one place, but we've seen mountain lions here, we've seen, you know, whatever.
Actually, with both Facebook and Instagram right now, they both have
both of them have it.
tagging. You take a picture now,
location tagging.
It'll automatically do location tagging. Tell them not to.
That's true.
I actually had to tell them not to because I was like taking pictures. And I was looking at like my photo map, and all of a sudden, like everybody started like people I didn't even know were looking at my photos. And what's going on here? And they have full map displacement too.
Yeah. So it is more of a Facebook app. I think you're right, because it would make it a lot easier for the submissions, I think. Yep. Cool. Any other projects? No? Show off? Anybody? Anything else? Can I get a slice pizza?
No. A cookie.
They make great pizza.
So is anybody getting a certificate at those guys?
Yeah.
I know you are. That's good. And you're graduating?
Well, I got the class.
And what are you doing next?
Well, I'm working on business degree right now.
Good.
We got a general education though. So we're trying to transfer, and they say, oh, you can't transfer. Like, some guy in the wizard office said, you shall not pass. Once you take so-and-so classes. Definitely want to get the one you sign up. The graphics are the hardest thing to do. One thing I found hardest in working with, especially when I was in Dreamweaver, was placement of a lot of my graphics and tables. That was probably the hardest thing to do, because I work a lot in, you know, Illustrator, Photoshop, and you know, a lot of most editors, you can square anything where you want. But I noticed that when it comes to working with like Dreamweaver and MySQL, Workbench, even WordPress, everything was kind of like ribs pretty much. So I have to like, so I have to go in like, you know, adjust the coding. I have to make blocks and margins and spaces, like everything. And actually, the funny thing was when I first started learning, I learned it straight off text edit. I learned all the code off the screen, and then I basically went from text edit to making the website. It was just like, you know, all these automated things. I didn't like it. I would just go straight to the code. I wouldn't even look at my final product until I was done, because I knew exactly what everything would do to it. You know,
nobody did it good when you could see the finish by looking at the code.
Exactly. That's what we got to the point where I was just like, oh, that's not offset. You know?
I don't always get it, but I think sometimes. See the page from the code.
Wow.
What can I do?
Firefox.
Oh, I have a call. First of all, I have an hour.
Thank you.
I don't know anything about Firefox. I don't know. I believe that I'm having an issue with. I can't get it resolved in the next 2 hours. I'm going to have to revamp it and set it up to the server.
You're getting the data to
I almost have no problem.
So I was just going to
I had to read all of my projects, all of my submissions, all my sites. Yeah, I was trying to upload it earlier today, and on FTP I used both files and Google, and they both were like, oh, there it goes, 0.
They always put like Dreamweaver will do this work and then run out of space on the
Exactly.
And they don't know files are going to delete. You just can't even connect with your
Yeah, Google doesn't even delete files. You have to go and view hidden files to delete a main file. So I have to file to do all that taken care of. And it was super annoying. But hopefully, it's not to go back home now and finish those 2 titles. Because apparently I didn't link in there all the way. Because that's what I was crossing my fingers for. I was hoping everything loaded up on there. It was what, 40 megabytes or something like that we get?
I think that's about it. Yeah.
It's super small. Yeah, it's really bad. I mean, barely enough on the site.
I like the PDF, PHP PDF.
Yeah,
That thing, very good.
that looks so cool.
Actually, I want to talk to my client. And
This is a nice-
maybe you can go and redo it. So I did a snow kind of search and rescue website.
Mhm.
And basically what I did was everything I went to the guy did to my site first. And then I got like a little framing device, and then I went to over there, and I was like, all right, I can do this, you know.
I learned all my webs. I never took a class on this. I took a Photoshop class. Was the only ones I took. But I learned everything just volunteering on sites.
Most of the time,
Doing non-profits and things like that.
I mean, it's wonderful, but all the time people
You had to go figure it out. Okay, there's
No, I had to like figure it out.
I remember. That's fine. I mean, God. That is fine. I'm going.
And I could really appreciate it.
It's home made.
So, it's also small.
I stole this out of there.
Yeah, you grabbed a handful, shut your head, and walked out.
Oh, really?
What? Hell no.
More stickers, anybody? This looks like a good concept.
If you have like a cursor tag or something like that, you have a cursor pointer on it, which I wouldn't necessarily. So you might want to do
Let me.
you don't want everything done if you have that.
Good.
I was wondering about Bootstrap myself.
And you just got, I think it's cursor pointer. Just change it. And that way people know.
So I can't read this.
I think everybody had cookies.
Sorry.
I know. I truly believe that. If
So I'm having a hard time reading your question, Barbara. I was wondering about the WordPress carousel maintaining. Yeah, you asked those questions on the forum. I guess I'm having problems.
Jay?
Yep.
I doubt that I'll end up finishing it tonight. So tomorrow, I can't just go adding, but I'll just set up the student server and put out something, I don't know, small, that just deals with the technology we've gone over.
Yeah, just send me a note. Let me know.
Is that from a
If you need help, send me a note tomorrow. I might be able to help you through it. I'm going to be grading all day, most of the day.
You're going to have to figure out how to
It's the good part. That's a waste.
You know, I need to cross usually. This is deep there. So let me, so Barbara, I saw your notes. I'm not sure what the problem is, but when I get home tomorrow, I'll take a look at it. And
I know your email.
see if I can if I can send you a note and help you through that. So, you're welcome. So anyway, I am going to sign off because everyone is leaving here, and it's almost 10. So thanks for a great semester, and hopefully we'll see you soon.